This is Dr. Weissel, and this is the second part of a lecture on the Buddhist philosophical doctrine of emptiness. Now, in part one, we walked through the Prajna Paramita the Heart Sutra, the most important central text in this understanding of this key doctrine of emptiness. And there we learned that if we understand emptiness, if we could fully understand that, we would understand everything and we would attain thereby enlightenment, wisdom, nirvana, release from the veil of ignorance and illusion. So it's very important for us, according to the Buddhists, that we really understand this doctrine. So in this second part, we want to look at that in great detail and then try to compare that to some Western philosophical ideas. So emptiness, sunyata, means devoid of intrinsic existence or essence or nature. The word there is svabhava, devoid of svabhava. Sunyata and svabhava, excuse my pronunciation, are opposites. Intrinsic, let's just say a word about that. Intrinsic means kind of a built-in or essential or absolute type of existence or essence or nature, a built-in nature. So let's look at what we're told about this doctrine of emptiness. Nagarjuna, we met last time. For those to whom emptiness makes sense, everything makes sense. That's exactly what we saw in the Heart Sutra. Nagarjuna also said, if they or we view emptiness in the wrong way, those of limited intelligence will be ruined. Think about those two statements. On the one hand, it's absolutely vital to understand emptiness because if we do, everything else will make sense. Second of all, there's a warning. If we get it wrong, though, if we misunderstand emptiness, we're going to be in big trouble. And instead of being able to understand everything, we will misunderstand everything. The doctrine is that central. Aryadeva says, when one sees reality, one achieves the supreme abode. Even by seeing the slightest bit, one is better off. Therefore, the wise should always cultivate such wisdom in order to contemplate the inner phenomena. So from Aryadeva we hear, I understand the importance of emptiness. I understand the risks of misunderstanding emptiness. But the point is, if we can even get it a little bit, get it right a little bit, we'll be better off. So if we're wise, we should not shy away from this effort to understand this doctrine of emptiness. The question is, though, what does emptiness mean? The key concern of the Buddhist thinkers, the Madhyamikas, as we learned last time, those who adhere to the Madhyamaka philosophy, the key concern is to avoid two extremes. On the one hand, there's the idea of essentialism. Essentialism is the idea of a permanence to things. A reification, that's a big word that means, a re means a thing, to turn reality into things or thinginess or intrinsic being. The things are the way they are. It is what it is, we like to say. That's a mistake, according to the Buddhists, in a certain sense. There's a mistake to that things have permanent essences. They just are certain things and not other things. And they can be one or the other. That's a mistake. That's the, if I could put it this way, the key opponent of the Madhyamikas. The philosophers, and we've met them in this course, who try to find the essence of things, the nature of things, the permanent, unchanging essence of things. There's a mistake in that, say the Buddhists. But on the other hand, the Madhyamikas want to avoid the idea or the commitment to nihilism. Nihil in Latin means nothing. So nihilism is the point of view that there isn't anything. There are no things, there are no values, there is no reality, there's nothing. The worry here is that some people trying to understand the doctrine of emptiness are going to get it fundamentally wrong by thinking that that doctrine just means everything's an illusion, there's nothing that's real, there's nothing. Nihil. So Essentialism is the doctrine of the obvious opponents of the Madhyamika. Nihilism is the view of people who may think they're friends of the Madhyamikas, who think there is something to this idea of emptiness, but they're getting it wrong. And remember, we learned if we get it wrong, we're in big trouble. Emptiness is strictly opposed to essentialism, but it is a real question whether it entails nihilism or not. In other words, it's a mistake that people might, in a sense, be forgiven for making. It is a way to understand emptiness, but the Madhyamikas want to say that it's still a mistake, and there's a better way to understand this doctrine. Now, I just want to say for the record, if you dig deep into this, and again, as I said last time, I'm certainly no expert. I'm interested. I'm trying to learn about this. If you dig into this in any depth, you will find that there's a great deal of disagreement over exactly what emptiness means and what the implications are. That you can find that right from the get-go in the tradition, as we'll see, and you can also see it among contemporary scholars of this doctrine. What exactly does it mean, and what exactly does it entail? I hope to provide nothing more than a beginning way to start thinking about this question. But like all the things that we learn in this course philosophically, it's just a beginning, and there's many more questions that are raised and more things we would need to explore in our philosophical path. But let's try to do the best we can, because as Aryadeva says, if we get a little of it, maybe we'll be better off. So there's this spectrum. Essentialism, that things have this intrinsic or necessary existence as such, that things have substantial being, they just are what they are, on the one hand, and nihilism, the idea that nothing exists and all is illusory. Where's the middle ground in that? And last time we read through the Heart Sutra, and we used a translation by Thich Nhat Hanh. And when Thich Nhat Hanh talked about why he wanted to do this new translation, he talked about a couple of different stories, and here's one. The Zen master asked the novice monk, "Tell me about your understanding of the Heart Sutra." The novice monk joined his palms and replied, "I have understood that the 5 skandhas, those heaps or aggregates we talked about, the 5 skandhas are empty. There are no eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, or mind. There are no forms, sounds, smells, tastes, feelings, or objects of mind. The 6 consciousnesses do not exist. The 18 realms of phenomena do not exist. The 12 links of dependent arising do not exist. Even wisdom and attainment do not exist." The Zen master asked, "Do you believe what it says?" The novice monk said, "Yes, I truly believe what it says." "Come closer to me," the Zen master instructed the novice monk. When the novice monk drew near, the Zen master immediately used his thumb and index finger to pinch and twist the novice's nose. In great agony, the novice cried out, "Teacher, you're hurting me." The Zen master looked at the novice. "Just now you said that the nose doesn't exist. But if the nose doesn't exist, then what's hurting?" Now, it's kind of a funny image to conjure up, but that's what we're talking about. On the one hand, this novice monk thinks he understood emptiness as there's just nothing. But you pinch his nose and he doesn't think there's nothing. So what is emptiness trying to teach us? That's really going to be the question. Pratitya samutpada, dependent arising. That's going to be the answer. What do you mean by emptiness? I'm going to mean dependent arising. Nagarjuna, we propound that the dependent arising of things is called emptiness. That which arises dependently has no intrinsic nature. Or Tsongkhapa says, the very meaning of emptiness is dependent arising. So consider what that means, this dependent arising. To use modern philosophical terminology here, think about mereological reductionism. There's a big phrase for you. Mereological reductionism. What's mereology? Well, it's an ology, right? It's a study of or thinking about things in a certain way. Mere means parts. So mereological explanation of something explains things in terms of their parts. Okay, so far so good. Mereological reduction then means that things reduce to or are nothing but their parts. So for example, a car reduces to its tires, fenders, pistons, brakes, etc. A car, if you think about it, is really nothing but those parts, and then you could keep going from there. So a tire might reduce to the molecules or atoms that make it up. So you take something like a car and you say, what is the car really? It's the parts. And what are the parts? Well, maybe they have parts. Only those things that do not reduce further have intrinsic existence. In other words, they exist as such. Probably if you asked anybody, even ask yourself, to do a mereological reduction of anything, you would probably land, I'm guessing, at atoms. Or if you had a little science, you'd say, well, subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, or even subatomic particles, quarks and charms and muons, gluons, quarks, those things. Okay, but at a certain point you say, well, I've hit bottom. Mereological reductionism is already opposed to the kind of essentialism that we met in Aristotle or in St. Thomas Aquinas, where, following Aristotle, we just want to find the variety of real substantial beings that there are and understand them in terms of their unchanging essences. Mereological reduction says, no sense trying to find the essence of a human would reduce to the human's parts. No sense trying to find the essence of a car. There's something illusory about that. A car just is its atoms, something along those lines. There's a famous example, it came from Plutarch, called the ship of Theseus. You've probably thought about this. Maybe you've thought about this. Here's the original. The ship wherein Theseus and the youth of Athens returned after an adventure had 30 oars. This ship they captured and was preserved by the Athenians down even to the time of Demetrius Phalereus, whoever that was. For they took away the old planks of this boat as they decayed, putting in new and stronger timber in their place, insomuch that this ship became a standing example among the philosophers for the logical question of things that grow, one side holding that the ship remained the same and the other contending that it was not the same. And you could think about that. If I took a ship and I pulled off one plank and I put another one on, would you say, yeah, it's the same ship, just got a new plank? Well, if I took off a second board and put another one in, would you say, that's the same ship, just has two new planks? Okay, what if one by one we take off each plank, nail, sail, board, and replace it with a brand new one? Would we have the same ship with new parts? Or would there be something new? If you say that's the same ship, I've been working on it out in the backyard, I'm trying to rebuild it from scratch, I'm trying to make it new, that's my boat, that's the boat I've been working on for the past few years, you tend to think that that boat has an essence. Something stayed the same through all those changes. And the philosophical question would be, well, what is that? If you think there's something new, then you're into a kind of reductionism. There's no such thing as the boat. There's just an ever-changing collection, assemblage of boards and nails and sails. Okay, so let's go back. How did Aristotle define substance? Well, in general, he would have said that which is apt to exist in itself and not as an intrinsic part of another. A whole thing existing in its own right. An abiding, a lasting center of activity. Remember, that means both acting and being acted upon, or both. It's a substance is that which remains what it is essentially throughout all kinds of accidental change. Remember that? An accidental change would be the kind of change that, while it's a real change, it doesn't change what the thing is essentially. So if I take my coffee cup and I fill it with coffee, the coffee mug is my coffee mug. If I finish off the coffee and now the coffee cup is empty, again, the situation has changed, but the cup is the same. If I paint it red, if I paint it blue, Aristotle would say that's an accidental change. It's changed, but not essentially, just accidentally. Madhyamaka questions whether there is or could be that thing, which Aristotle would call a substance, which lasts through all those changes. What is that thing that didn't change amongst all that change? Madhyamika say, not sure there is anything. Let's take John Locke, the English philosopher, from his essay concerning understanding. The idea of ours, to which we give the general name substance, being nothing buttery is the way you do reduction, right? Nothing but, that's a reduction. The thing that we give the name substance, being nothing but the supposed but unknown support of those qualities we find existing, in which we imagine can exist, sine re substante. That's Latin. He defines it. That is, without something to support them. We call that support substantia, which according to the true meaning of the word is in plain English standing under or upholding. Sub is in Latin for under, and stans is Latin for standing. So substance, the English substance, literally means something that stands under something. So back to your boat in the backyard. You're working on that boat. You're changing the boards. You're changing the sails. But you keep saying to yourself, that's my boat. That's the boat. Same boat I've always been working on. You think underneath, standing under all that change is a something. And Locke describes this as an unknown support. At least it's an idea for that. So Aristotle and Locke actually have some differences, even though both believe that there's something called substance. For Aristotle, substance is just the object itself, just the thing, with its formal cause, its what kind, its final cause, its purpose or aim, in which the properties that it has are manifest. The coffee cup is a substance. My headphones are a substance. My laptop, in that sense, in general sense, is a substance. It's the thing itself. It has a what kind and a what for. Locke, on the other hand, thinks substance is a thin substratum, a base layer, lacking its own properties. And always in my head, when I think about Locke and his idea of substance, I think of Mr. Potato Head. I don't know if you know that game, but Mr. Potato is a plastic toy for kids. And you get this box, and there's this brown kind of orb with some holes in it. And then you can get a variety of eyes and lips and hats and mouths and mustaches and ears and stuff. And you can unplug some hats and eyes and plug in different ones. And Mr. Potato Head changes his look. In this view, the brown kind of orby thing, the potato, for Locke would be the substance. And the eyes and the hat and the mustache and the lips and the ears, those would be the properties that pincushion in to this unknown property-free substance layer, like a pincushion. Both believe in substance, but clearly different. Aristotle thinks we're talking about the thing. It's not some thing to which other things attach. For Aristotle, substance is a thing that is what it is. Locke, substance is what it is, but you really can't say anything about it because it's just sort of an empty container or receptacle for a bunch of properties. But in both cases, Aristotle and Locke, substance is something which lasts. The Madhyamaka philosophy disputes that. In other words, I don't care if you think of it like Aristotle, I don't care if you think about it like Locke, it's a mistake, according to the Madhyamikas. We have met some substance skeptics in this course. Heraclitus, remember him, the all is flux. Parmenides, being is one, and the idea that there's all these different things is somehow an illusion. We remember Zeno with his various paradoxes about you can't run a race, or arrow in flight isn't moving, those kind of things. David Hume, who we'll talk about in just a second. Immanuel Kant had those views. Even some contemporary thinkers called trope theorists have some kinship in their thinking to the ideas of the Madhyamika thinkers and emptiness. They're all skeptical that there are things that just are what they are in some kind of ultimate sense. Now let's go and talk about David Hume. You might remember he's the guy who awakened Kant from his dogmatic slumber. He's the philosopher of empiricism. Unless we can see it, smell it, touch it, taste it, or hear it, it isn't. And that sent, you might remember, Kant into a tizzy about how to think about that. Well, here's Hume on this particular subject of substance. When we gradually follow an object in its successive changes, the smooth progress of the thought makes us ascribe an identity to the succession of changes, because 'tis by a similar act of the mind we consider an unchangeable object. It's an act of the mind. When we compare its situation after considerable change, the progress of the thought is broke, and consequently we are presented with the idea of diversity. In order to reconcile which contradictions the imagination is apt to feign, that means make up, something unknown and invisible, which it supposes to continue the same under all these variations. And this unintelligible something it calls substance, or original and first matter. He's kind of giving his knock on John Locke there. Think about this. When your mom pulls out the baby pictures of you and say, "Oh, look at you. You were so cute when you were a little baby." You look in the mirror, you don't look anything like that baby. What is it that makes you and that baby one person, one human being? What is that? What is it that stayed the same throughout all that change? Philosophers wonder about that. Hume says, if I sat with you wide awake right next to you for your whole life, there would be this gradual, successive series of changes. I would see them all and I would know. But if I saw you when you were a little baby and then we went our separate ways and now I see you today, you don't look anything like that baby. So I think, well, yeah, but it's the same person. So if I'm going to be a philosopher and think about that, I'll think, oh, well, there must be the person's soul, let's say, is their substantial being. That's who they are. And all the rest of this stuff, their properties, pin-cushioned into this soul. And Hume thinks that's just something the mind does, but it doesn't correlate to reality. I do that to try to make sense of things, but it doesn't mean that's the way the world is. Hume continues, the idea of a substance is nothing but a collection of simple ideas that are united by the imagination and have a particular name assigned to them, by which we are able to recall, either to ourselves or others, that collection. My coffee cup, Dave, Jane, a name I assign to this collection of simple ideas of size and color and weight and all those kind of things. So I can talk about it. It's handy to do that. But the difference betwixt these ideas consists in this, that the particular qualities which form a substance are commonly referred to an unknown something in which they are supposed to inhere, or granting this fiction should not take place, are at least supposed to be closely and inseparably connected by the relations of contiguity, that means they're touching each other, and causation. In other words, Hume would not be that far off from the Madhyamikas to say the thinginess of things is something conferred by the mind and not something discovered by the mind, something the mind does. Emptiness, then. Madhyamikas hold that nothing has intrinsic existence. In other words, everything, quote unquote, reduces to something else. But it never hits bottom. It never even hits Locke's something or other substratum. It never hits bottom. Everything reduces to or is dependent upon something else. Now, what's the implications of that? Does it really mean nihilism, metaphysical nihilism? The claim that reality is this way, nothing exists. That's one possible way of interpreting the implications. Another one, according to Mark Sideritz, from the material I made available to you, he calls this, here's what it means. Reality is ineffable. That means you can't understand it. Reality just can't be known or understood by humans. But it's a claim about reality. It's a claim about the world. It's a metaphysical claim. Hey, you want to know how things are? Here's how they are. You can't understand them. So right now we got two options. One, here's how things are. There isn't anything. The second option is, here's how things are. Humans just can't understand it. Now, are there other possibilities? And this is Sideritz wondering about this. He says, well, there would be other ways of understanding this only if we resist a false presupposition that is behind both of those two possibilities. The metaphysical nihilism and reality is ineffable. There's a presumption behind that Sideritz says may be false. What is that false proposition? Here it is. That there is such a thing as the way that things absolutely objectively are. Think about that for a second. Do you believe that, philosopher? Do you believe that? That there is a way that things just absolutely objectively are? Not according to a person's opinion or perspective, just the way they are. If that presupposition is false, there's another way of understanding things. And that would be a third option. There's no ultimate truth. Now, it sounds maybe like the second, but it's different. Here's how. 1 and 2 are metaphysical interpretations of emptiness, right? They're theories about how reality is. The third option that we're entertaining here is a semantic or maybe even epistemological interpretation. It's about the nature, not of reality now, but of the nature of truth. And the point here is, this interpretation of emptiness says, look, there are no ultimate, absolute, objective truths. All truth is what we call conventional. Now, what do we mean by a conventional truth? Very quickly. Well, we, for instance, in America, drive on the right-hand side of the road. And if somebody says, what side of the road do I drive? I say, you drive on the right side of the road. And you would say, well, that's true. That's a truth. You should drive on the right-hand side of the road. But if we were in England, that would not be true. Drive on the right side of the road, that's false. Don't say that. That's the wrong thing to say. You should say drive on the left-hand side of the road. Now, neither one of those truths, drive on the right-hand side, drive on the left-hand side, neither one of those are ultimate, absolute, objective truths. They're true by convention in the sense that there is a tacit, maybe not a explicit agreement, but there's a tacit agreement in society that, look, let's do it this way. We'll just say, here's what we should do, drive on the right-hand side of the road in America. Or over there in England, they might say, drive on the left-hand side of the road. So for the Madhyamikas, the idea is all truth is like that kind of truth, conventional truth. There is no ultimate, final, absolute, objective truth about the nature of reality. All of it is conventional. Now, where does that leave us? Well, here's some statements about conventional truth versus ultimate truth. Here's a definition. A process of aggregation, that means pulling things together, performed by the mind, it's something the mind does, a function of what works for us according to our interests. I think David Hume would agree with that. Certainly American pragmatism, which you've read a little about, would agree with that. It refers to that which takes its action from something else, right? It doesn't stand alone. And actually, if you think about it, conventional truth is a kind of a fiction. So we say, we Madhyamikas, we philosophers of emptiness, we'd say, look, you say there's a car, but really, that's just a conventional truth. It's a truth that in a weird way is a made-up truth. It's a fiction. It's been put together by the mind, a work of imagination. It's a way of talking about this conglomeration of things as if it were an entity in its own right, as if it were a substance. So we say it's absolutely true. There's a car in the parking lot. That's true. It's true. But it's only conventionally true. It's not absolutely true. There's a car in the parking lot because that's the way we look at things. Nietzsche, who we talked about, there are no facts, only interpretations. A lot of people think that he had a real gotcha there. Oh, Nietzsche, you claim there's no facts, only interpretations. Isn't that just an interpretation? Or are you saying absolutely this is an ultimate truth? There are no facts, only interpretation. And Nietzsche was onto that game. He says elsewhere, supposing this is also only an interpretation, and you'll be eager enough to make this objection, he says, well, so much the better. He liked to say, nobody was easily entitled to my truth. Get your own truth, right? No facts, only interpretations. Well, that would be consonant with emptiness. William James, American pragmatist, we just mentioned that. He says, the true is the name of whatever proves itself to be good in the way of belief and good too for definite assignable reasons. That's often summarized as James saying, truth is what works. It's what gets us through the day. It's much easier and more effective for me to say, could you go out there and please get my briefcase out of the car? Instead of saying, would you please go out there to that aggregation of all these little microscopic parts in a big pile and get this other separate, we don't talk like that. Go out to the car, please, and bring me my briefcase. That's the way we talk, because we got things we're interested in. We got things we're doing. We don't have time for all that other kind of stuff. We're being pragmatic. A more contemporary American pragmatist, postmodern philosopher, Richard Rorty, once said somewhere that truth is what your friends will allow you to get away with saying. Truth is what your friends will allow you to get away with saying. Think about that for a second. First of all, he doesn't mean what anybody would allow you to get away with saying. He's not an absolutist. He's a relativist in that sense. If I say something and none of my friends makes an objection, we more or less go on as if what I said was true. If I say something and my friends, the people who are in my world, who look at the world in general, most of the time the way I do, say, hey, wait a minute, that's not right. It may be that I said something false. So Madhyamika philosophers have a lot in common with philosophers like Hume, the empiricist, and Nietzsche, the perspectivalist, and James, the pragmatist, and Rorty, the pragmatist. For the traditional philosophy, Abhidharma philosophy, we talked about that last time. That's that orthodox Buddhist philosophy that all students would have had to have studied to become, Buddhist monks and teachers. According to that, the ultimate truth are the dharmas. That means, in this case, not dharma the practice, but dharmas as that which cannot further be reduced to anything else. In our modern scientific view, we may say subatomic particles are the dharmas. You just can't break them up anymore. Or you might say, if you're really up on it, you might say strings are the ultimate. Maybe you've heard of string theory in physics. Strings, tiny little strings that vibrate, are the dharmas. You can't reduce them to anything else. Even the Greek word atom comes from atomos, which means see, but it literally means as a negative, like un or not. It means uncuttable, right? That's it. A dharma is not dependent on anything else. It's that which exists in its own right, independent of what anybody thinks. And at that point, you can't explain the basic building block of reality if you believe in dharmas and if you believe in substance. You can't explain the basic building block of reality in terms of anything else. That's just it. So as the way Sideritz puts it, you don't know it by describing it or showing how it was caused, because you've hit bottom. You just kind of know it by acquaintance. Kind of like how you know the person in your life who loves you loves you. You don't know that by a whole series of demonstrations. You just know it by acquaintance. Now again, the dharmas would be ultimate truths, and the Madhyamikas object to this idea that you hit bottom sometime. You just object to it. The ultimate truths for them would be about the dharmas. They would be impartite, simple, uncuttable. Good examples would be like the ones we met at the beginning of the class, the elements, fire, air, earth, and water, before Thales came along and said, well, what makes up fire? Ordinary folks said, well, fire is fire. That's it. That's bottom. And there's air and earth and water like that. Okay, so there's different interpretations of these schools, exactly how to understand them. I will burn you with that. They're in the notes here. But I just want to show you quickly how the Madhyamikas argue in favor of their doctrine of emptiness, how they argue in favor of that. And a lot of times these arguments have the same kind of format. We call it a reductio ad absurdum. We reduce something to absurdity. What's the something? Well, you start with a premise or a hypothesis and you say, look, if that's true, it would have consequences that are completely bizarre, and you would never believe the consequences. So, therefore, that premise or that hypothesis can't be true. If you believe that, you'd have to believe this crazy thing. And of course, you don't want to believe that crazy thing, so you don't want to believe the first thing. And a lot of arguments work like that. The arguments in favor of emptiness start with a contrary claim. They go, okay, fine. Let's suppose that there is substance. Let's suppose that there is intrinsic existence or nature, essence. Let's suppose there is. Then we show how that leads to absurd conclusions. And so this hypothesis that there's substance or intrinsic existence, it can't be right. And you have to agree with us Madhyamikas. Here's an example from causation. And of course, there's lots and lots of these. If things had intrinsic existence, they could not have been caused. Otherwise, their existence would be contingent on the cause. It would be a dependent arising, and we learned that's just the equivalent of emptiness. So things couldn't have been caused. Thus, there can be no causes. But things must have sufficient reason for their existence. I mean, they need an efficient cause. Thus, there cannot be things with intrinsic existence. You get it? Right? If things had intrinsic existence, they wouldn't be caused. But then, why would they be at all? Well, they need a cause. So things can't be like that. They can't be with intrinsic existence. They have to be dependently arisen. And there's lots and lots of arguments that kind of go in that way. So if you look at some of those texts I provided, you can try to identify some of those. So let's recall. Emptiness could mean that the ultimate reality is that nothing exists. Nihilism. It's a metaphysical claim. Statement of the basic nature of reality. Or emptiness could mean that ultimate reality is such that it cannot be understood by us humans. Another claim about the basic nature of reality. Or emptiness could mean that ultimate truth is that there is no ultimate truth, if that's not a paradox. The ultimate truth is that there's not an ultimate truth about reality. That's a semantic claim. In other words, all truth is conventional. It's a way of talking, but there's no one single objective way of talking. Asking about the ultimate truth, in a way, would be like asking about the ultimate language. Which is the right language? English, Urdu, French, Russian. You would think that's crazy. Or like saying, looking for the ultimate truth would be like looking for the ultimate music. The one true music. Nobody talks like that, right? That doesn't make any sense. So emptiness is saying, one way of interpreting is there is no such thing as ultimate truth. It's all conventional from a perspective, from a point of view, according to interest. Okay, let's suppose that. But what about the claim itself? What about this whole doctrine? What about this whole philosophical position of emptiness and dependent arising? What about that? Guess what? It's also empty. The very idea of ultimate truth is also empty. We talk about ultimate truth maybe because we have certain needs, interests, desires, or whatever, but that doesn't mean that's the way the world is. It's the way we talk. It's the way we think. And that means we might have been able to think otherwise. Probably could have thought otherwise. Right? The very idea of ultimate truth is empty. Back to Nietzsche. It's like his claim everything's perspective. You go, oh, well, what about that? Is that just another perspective? Nietzsche says, yeah, right on. That's my way of looking at it. What are you going to do? How are you going to think? What's your truth? Now, these objections to the claim of emptiness were understood by proponents, right? So here's from the great treatise. If all things are completely without intrinsic existence, wouldn't it be the case? Your words also lack intrinsic nature, I meant to say, and thus cannot refute intrinsic existence. In other words, if your words aren't absolutely true, why should I pay any attention to them? Well, Nagarjuna had a response to that, just like Nietzsche had a response. Nagarjuna said, because things such as pots and cloth are dependent arisings, they are empty of intrinsic nature. Yet a pot can receive and hold honey, water, and soup. A cloth can protect one from the cold or wind or sun. And so it is with my words. Because they are dependent arisings, they lack intrinsic nature. I'm not going to make the claim they're absolutely true. Yet they are fully capable of establishing that things lack intrinsic existence. In other words, they could work. They could get you, the thinker, the person, to the place where you need to be in your thoughts. That's what he's saying. It's pragmatic. They're useful. I don't even know what it would mean to say they're absolutely true. The question is, do they work? What are the effects? So the key to understanding emptiness, therefore, according to the great treatise, therefore, to avoid falling to the extreme of existence, intrinsic existence, essentialism, you must realize that from the outset, all phenomena lack even a particle of essential, intrinsic, absolute existence or essence. And to escape the extreme of non-existence, nihilism, you must develop definite knowledge that things such as seedlings nevertheless have the power to perform their own functions, grow up in the trees. That is, they do not turn into non-things which are empty of the capacity to perform functions. In a way, you could think about this the way we thought about Aristotle's nature of the soul and how it was different from Plato's. For Plato, you got the idea that the soul was a thing, a mysterious, invisible, immaterial thing that rode around in a visible material thing called a body. Descartes talked like that too. But remember, Aristotle talked about the human soul as functionality. Soul is about vegetative and nutritive functionality. It's about appetitive functionality. It's about rational functionality. It's functioning. There's functioning. Things are functions, processes. It's dynamic and not static silos of things. The essentialists object to the absence of intrinsic nature as being non-existence. The Madhyamikas say, yeah, there's an absence of intrinsic nature, but it does not mean non-existence. So Chandrakirti replies to this objection. He says, we are not proponents of non-existence or nihilism, for we are proponents of dependent arising. Are we proponents of real things in the sense of essential natures? No, because we are proponents only of dependent arising. So what do we propound? We propound dependent arising. What is the meaning of dependent arising? It means the absence of intrinsic existence. It means no intrinsically existent production, things that are what they are. It means the arising of effects whose nature is similar to a magician's illusion. A mirage, a reflection, a phantom city, an emanation or a dream. It means emptiness and, for us, very importantly, selflessness. Remember we talked about the noble truths. There's suffering. Suffering's caused by desire. If you could get rid of desire, you get rid of suffering, and you could do that by following the Eightfold Path. And one of those, you had to have the right views. And the one right view you have to have is that you don't have a self, that you aren't a self. If you have that view, then you won't crave yourself. You won't desire that yourself remain in existence when it's an illusion anyway. And therefore, when it doesn't do what you think it's going to do, you won't be disappointed and you won't suffer. So no self is a very important corollary to emptiness. But again, doesn't mean you're nothing, that you're zero. It means you need to have a better understanding of the fact that you are what you are, in effect, because everything, as Thich Nhat Hanh puts it, inner is. So, Chandrakirti, a little bit more. Don't misunderstand, he says. There's the other side. We're not nihilists. We refute both the proposition of existence or essentialism and the proposition of non-existence or nihilism. We illuminate the path free from those two, the path that leads to the city of nirvana. We also do not claim karma, agents, effects, and so forth do not exist. What do we say? We posit that these lack intrinsic, absolute, timeless, essential nature, but a nature that's dynamic and in flux. So what's the worry here? The real worry is the problem of nirvana. Buddhism, the religion, if that's what we want to call it, is after getting us to a certain state, a state of nirvana, getting us off the cycle of rebirth and suffering. The concern then is whether emptiness, this doctrine, negates the teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And we even saw when we read the Heart Sutra, it says even the Four Noble Truths are empty. The worry is, if emptiness is true, then is there really a true doctrine like the Four Noble Truths? Or even Buddhism? Why even pay attention to it? That leads to the cessation of suffering and rebirth. The response is kind of clever, I think. The response of the Madhyamikas is, well, look, if there's not emptiness, then there would be no ignorance about things, so no grasping, so no suffering, and so no rebirth. They actually turn this objection around again onto the critics. You say, well, if there's emptiness, why should I pay attention to Buddhism? Why should I pay attention to the Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path? Well, if there's not emptiness, then we could have made a mistake. We think they're things that are supposed to be a certain way when in fact they're not. And because we're disappointed, we suffer. Because we suffer, we desire not to suffer, and the whole process goes on and on. And we want to step off that process. But if there is emptiness, that explains where we could go wrong, where we can make mistakes, and why we desire things that are illusory. And if we could get over those illusions and become enlightened, maybe we could attain nirvana. So this kind of wrap this up is about what we call in philosophy, especially in theology, soteriology. That's a doctrine of salvation. Different religions have different soteriologies. So Christianity, salvation is from what? Sin, our sin nature. In Buddhism, what do we need to be saved from? Well, it's not sin in Buddhism, it's suffering. Right? So the worry is we won't have a way or a path to save us from this meaningless suffering. So emptiness could be interpreted to mean that reality is such that everything is dependent or connected to everything else. So no thing is what it is in isolation to everything else. There's no intrinsic being. Everything is. Well, okay, that's a metaphysical claim. And let's suppose you believe that. Everything is, everything is codependent. That could help end your suffering if you realize that you're not in constant struggle with everything else, but in fact, you're a part of everything else and everything else is a part of you. Maybe that would help you treat yourself and others with more compassion, right? That might work. So understanding emptiness could help make you more compassionate by seeing that you're connected with everybody and everything instead of always, like Hobbes would say, at war with everything. Emptiness could be interpreted to mean that there is no ultimate truth about reality, as we learned, that there is no ultimate truth, that all truth is conventional. Well, that might help us be humble, let's say, about our views. I have a view. It seems to be working. It seems to help me be a better person and to thrive and have more happiness. I don't know if it's the only way. I don't know if it's the absolute way. I don't need to get everybody else to think exactly the way I think or to believe what I believe or to practice the way I practice. Maybe this understanding of emptiness would help me to be more humble and therefore more at peace with others, maybe. Maybe we are less selfish. Maybe we're more humble, right? Okay. Maybe the idea of ultimate truth, though, could be a useful fiction. In other words, talking about the Four Noble Truths and talking about the Eightfold Path as if this is the way. Well, if it does get us where we need to be, maybe that's all the proof of this truth we need. Who knows if it's ultimate, but to think of it as ultimate and keep focused on that and take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. If we do that, says the Buddhist, well, maybe it'll be useful. Maybe it'll get us where we need to go. So summary. Nagarjuna says, everything is real and is not real. Both real and unreal. Neither unreal nor real. This is the Lord Buddha's teaching. You should scratch your head, right? Right? If you read that for the first time instead of listening to all this, you would scratch your head. Wait a minute, it's real? It's not real. It's real and unreal. It's neither unreal. It's just a confusion. How do I even make sense of this? Well, the answer lies in how Nagarjuna taught this doctrine that things are and aren't, both are and aren't, neither are or not, the way he taught those doctrines. And he gave the analogy that it's medicinal or therapeutic, right? He asked rhetorically, cannot anything be medicine, right? Depending on what the disease is. I mean, anything might turn out to be helpful to somebody. So here's how he taught it. First, he had these students come in who might have been young, let's say, and carefree. So the first thing he did is he helped to get them to think that things are real and that they could begin where they are and try to get them where the teacher needs to take them. Things are real. You know they were real. You should have some confidence in your thinking. And then Nagarjuna taught that things were unreal in order to eliminate being too grasping at things. Right? You desire those things. But if you get too graspy about those things, you're going to suffer, and that's going to be a problem. And then third, he taught that things both do and do not change, then depending on your perspective, depending on what works. If I need to move on in the world, I have to take things seriously. I got to play the game seriously. But if the game gets me too stressed, I got to remember it's a game. It's not really a real thing. It's a game that I'm playing. Depends on perspective. Now, if he quit there, if Nagarjuna quit there with his students, they might have walked out the front door of his schoolroom going, you know what? I am enlightened. I have it figured out because now I know the truth, and the truth can be found in emptiness and dependent arising and no self. That's the truth. That's the absolute truth. Now I'm a Buddhist. Now I am wise. Man, that is an occupational hazard of philosophers. They get some philosophical ideas and they quit. And they just think, I got it. I got it all figured out. So Nagarjuna has to take him one more step. He taught that neither permanence nor impermanence have intrinsic existence, in order to be sure that the students did abandon a grasping at even philosophical views. Right? It's the grasping, it's the holding on to things, it's the inability to hold things with an open hand, according to Nagarjuna, that caused the desire, which caused the suffering, which caused the continued cycle of birth and death. So when he says it's true and it's not, it's real and it's not all at the same time. It's where a student is in their learning process, what's the best medicine for them to finally attain true wisdom and enlightenment. And he's careful to be sure to say, like maybe, hopefully I said to you at the beginning of the course, you can get an A++ in your knowledge of what we talked about in this class, but that in itself will not make you a philosopher. What makes you a philosopher is if you internalize that and keep asking about it, keep questioning it, and living on with this idea that you're never wise, right? The paradox is the person who says they're wise usually turns out to be a fool because they're done looking. The wise person, like Socrates, says, my wisdom consists in this, I know that I don't know. So, are we ready to learn emptiness? Well, I hope this has helped you think about this doctrine, and there's plenty of time for further discussion of this in the course.